transit work a lot better when you can look and focus on your community and start to fill it in with housing downtown. And we're going to hear more about that from Eileen. And getting these connected, that's what makes transit work. And adding bike racks on little cutout buses, is actually even more. And this is my idea of a parking garage. And this is my idea of really getting transit working. And when you can put housing downtown and having people use that and not having that parking demand. So what can you do? You can become knowledgeable. You can get real world issues. Understand, you heard from McKibben that it's all about physics. It's really understanding the math and really then questioning that math and thinking like a scientist and engaging with the visionaries. Those visionaries really are the generalists that fit together with the experts. And there's credit here to Julie. Go to her at juliecampoli.com. She has amazing slides, written many books about visualizing density. And that's me. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to, let's see, is this it? It is. I am amazed at myself and how electronically I can do that. Just amazing.
It's magic.
It's magic.
Great, thank you very much, Deb. Great setup. Start. If I look down here at my phone, I'm looking at a timer, not my text messages. Thank you all for being here. My name is Kate McCarthy. I'm the Sustainable Communities Program Director with the Vermont Natural Resources Council. And I'm going to kind of build on what Deb talked about to discuss land use, smart growth, energy, and climate change. I hope by the end that I can give you some ideas that you can take home to your communities. For my presentation, I'm going to cover three things. First, what are land use and smart growth and how do they relate to climate change and energy? You may have a sense of this. I'd like to help flesh out your sense of that. What are some obstacles, challenges, and opportunities when it comes to smart growth, energy, and climate change? There are a bunch. We'll talk about some of them. And then I'm going to leave you with 3 steps that I thought of that you can take as someone working on energy in your community. There are probably many more ideas. Would love to hear them from you, but I'll tell you what's on my mind in that regard. So just very briefly, I should let you know that VNRC is a statewide environmental advocacy organization. I direct the Sustainable Communities Program, which is one of 4 programs. The one you may be most familiar with is our really excellent energy and climate program with Johanna Miller, who we've seen today.
Yay.
Yeah. We also have a forest and wildlife program, as well as a water program. And we do our work in a few ways. We're in the State House, we're in communities, and we do research and education on our issues. We've been around for 50 years. We intend to be around for at least 50 more. And so we're very happy to take the long view of all these changes that need to be made to keep our state strong. So that's a little about VNRC. So just diving right in. What is land use? Land use is what happens on the land. And when I say that, I'm talking about our choices about what happens where on the land. So not just about the use itself, whether we're putting down a house or a farm or a sawmill or a store or a school, but also about the way that use or development occupies the land. Does it take up a little bit of space? Does it have a lot of space? And what does that mean? So that's kind of how I think of land use. This is not an official planner approved definition. It's approved by me, and I'm a planner, so that's as far as it goes. Take that for what it's worth. So then there's the land use pattern or the settlement pattern, and that's the layout on the landscape that we get from those individual land uses together. And I have an example here of what that is. This is Morristown, and we've got 2 different land use or settlement patterns here. And this is also from Julie Campoli, who was mentioned earlier. She is a designer and an urban planner who has given a lot of thought to this, and she's also very talented with visualization, so we can kind of see what we're talking about when we're talking about land use. So in this picture, she's made buildings red and parking yellow. So looking at this smaller piece, what do we notice?
More red.
More red.
The red ones are multi-story there too.
The red ones are like, knowing what we know about Morrisville, yes, those red ones are multi-story.
Those up above are not.
Moving to the one up above, we've got a lot of single-story development. We have some industrial uses down here, and then some commercial. Got 2 grocery stores. We've got some other commercial activity up there. So what else do you notice about that top area?
Lots of parking.
Lots of parking.
Lots of parking.
Lots of parking. So we have 2 very distinct settlement patterns that happen. This is historic, this is more recent, and these are choices that we make. Sometimes it feels like it's not a choice because, oh, we have to provide parking for cars. Have to? Says who? Says the economy? Yes, in some ways. But as individuals, as people who participate in our communities, we can start to question these assumptions about why we need to do it a certain way. There's parking here too. It's in the back. And you still have a very vibrant, you have a very human-scaled streetscape in the middle. So, land use pattern, settlement pattern. Leave you to think about that. So then there's smart growth. How many of you have heard of smart growth? Oh, that's really good. All right, I'm going to talk about it anyway. I'll be brief. It's a type of settlement pattern, and it's one that aims to achieve certain things. It's a type of development that revitalizes neighborhoods, protects farmland, forest land, and open space, keeps housing affordable, and provides more transportation options. This has to be done intentionally. It doesn't automatically happen when you build a certain way, but when you think about how you're building, smart growth can help you get to these places. It also leads to certain outcomes: economic prosperity, more social equity, more environmental sustainability. I'll go briefly through 10 principles that go into creating a smart growth place. These are from Smart Growth America, which is a national nonprofit working on smart growth issues. So, mix of uses. A lot of our communities have single-use zones where you have just housing, just commercial, just industrial. That's a holdover. Does anyone know approximately the year when zoning was kind of invented?
World War II.
What's that?
Post-World War II.
Post-World War II is one guess?
74.
74.
1920.
1920.
March of 1923.
Alex, that was a very confident answer. Is it also correct?
No.
Okay. Nevertheless, that confidence and vision is something you need to bring into your community to see change happen. It was around 1920, and it was really codified with, it started in New York City, but then it was codified with a court decision out in Ohio. And that's the zoning we've kind of been using for 100 years. And separating uses 100 years ago made some sense because things were dirtier and stinkier than they are now.
Noisier.
And noisier. There were all sorts of external impacts. So mix of uses is something we can move back toward. A compact design is part of smart growth. A range of housing opportunities and choices. Nobody wants to, people need different things at different points in their lives. And we also have changing demographics right now in the US, including in Vermont. People aging, and also on the younger, well, everybody's aging, right? All the time. So older Vermonters, but on the younger end of the spectrum, smaller household sizes. And that requires a different type of housing. Human scale and walkable neighborhoods. Some places feel like humans belong there, other places feel like it's only for cars. Let's make more of the places that feel like they're for people. Distinct sense of place related to that. Protecting farm and forest land. Directing development to existing communities. The 6 and 7 are 2 sides of the same coin. And then, if we do those things, we are able to provide transportation choices, whether those are active modes, like walking and biking, or scooting, as we experienced recently in Montpelier. It was fun. Or to transit, or other types of innovation. There are 2 other principles that are not about exactly what happens on the land, but about how people are engaged in making places. You can't make places without people. And you need to make the development decisions fair, predictable, and cost-effective for the people who are involved, the neighbors and the developers and the investors. You also need to have real, meaningful community engagement and stakeholder collaboration. Okay. So those are the principles of smart growth. That's what we aim for when we try to do this. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what smart growth can get us. And this is an energy conference, so I thought I'd talk about energy, reduced energy consumption, as one outcome we can get from smart growth. I show this slide all the time. How many of you have seen it before? Oh, goody. This is one of my favorite slides ever. And what it tells us is the type of how much energy you use for your home and for your driving, depending on 2 things: where you live and what kind of technologies you employ. So to the far left, you see something that's called a suburban average, and this has to do with kind of your average house and your average car in a suburban location. And suburban can be hard to wrap our minds around in Vermont, but we do have places that are functionally suburban because of where they are and how they are separated from other places. So think of it that way. Now, if you go green in the suburbs, you can use that much energy, a little bit less. Instead of 239 MBTU, 158, improvement. Now, if you have a regular house and a regular car, but you live in a compact area, you're only gonna use 136 MBTU. If you go green in an urban setting, you can get down to 82, is what this tells us. So this suggests to me that location matters as much or more than technology.
Okay, is there a further left-hand column that would fit for rural sprawl?
I bet there is. I don't have it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There is, and rural sprawl is something that is kind of hard to wrap our minds around, but it is living in locations that require car dependence that are in rural areas. And so functionally, there are a lot of things that are like urban.
Which is most of Vermont.
Which is most of
It's a lot of Vermont. I grew up in Maine. I grew up on 2.5 acres, and as a kid, I loved it. I mean, I was out in the woods. Wasn't a forest anymore because there were 2.5 acre lots there. You know, it felt really comfortable to me as a kid. But I also realized going back, I have to get in a car to go everywhere. And so the function of the place really matters, and the energy follows. So yeah.
What explains the difference in the household use from one location to another? I mean, the urban average is high and.
It's comparable, isn't it?
Or is that the green versus non-green?
So yes, this is the green versus non-green.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for that question. So I'm getting excited, taking up too much time. I need to move on. But one other thing, energy consumption is reducing it is very motivating. But another way that you can talk about this is in terms of energy affordability. We'll talk about housing affordability in a minute, but that's only one part of our household expense. Another part is what we spend on our cars and our fuel and getting around, leaving aside all the time that we spend and lose in a car. They say that if you spend more than 15% of your income on transportation, you are transportation burdened. And in Vermont, even in our most compact areas, we did a little study and found that in Winooski and Burlington, people still spend 18% of their incomes on transportation. That's a model household, and those are our most compact areas.
Is that just the fuel or for the whole car?
The whole, including depreciation, insurance, repair, all that. So we have work to do, even in our most compact places. And in a rural state, that's hard. So what else do we get from smart growth? A more intact and resilient landscape. I won't go into this in great depth, but if we have intact forests, if we keep development out of our river corridors, and if we have farms where we can grow our food, we stand to benefit in a changing climate. All right, I'm going to pass over this slide because I think I just made my point about the importance of intact outlying areas. What I will say though is even though we don't think of Vermont as sprawly maybe, or just because it's not, pick on New Jersey, we are still losing large parcels of land, but we have the potential to do better. So we're still taking up quite a lot of space, even though our population's not growing. Okay, so now I'm going to move into my examples. And what I am going to talk about first, I'm going to try and talk about some of the obstacles and challenges to smart growth in terms of a couple case studies. And one of them is from Algiers Village in Guilford. How many of you are from that part of the world? Windham County. Yay, Windham County. So Guilford is just south of Brattleboro, Vermont, and it's a small village. And like a lot of villages in the state, it had fallen into some decline. Because of cheap gas, people can live in outlying areas. Because of challenges having to do with water supply, economic change, brownfields. You had a village here with a general store that was about to close and some empty lots. So in this case, there were the challenges. What we had as opportunities is people who saw that this empty part of the community, this empty part of the land, was a huge opportunity. And so in this case, you had a major grassroots local commitment to community development when a group called the Friends of Algiers Village came together, fundraised like crazy and purchased the land to hold it. Then they worked with their community members, Smart Growth Principle number 10, and developed a community vision for the future and what it could include. And they thought about housing. And then they pulled together partners, the Regional Planning Commission, the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, Senator Leahy, EPA, USDA Rural Development, lots and lots of partners. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. And it didn't happen overnight, it took about 10 years. But they ended up with, I believe, 25 units of housing for people at different, I've got 2 minutes, to different income levels. A transit line was extended down Route 5 to serve this housing development. They've got cleaner land. They've got a new general store across the street. I think Preservation Trust of Vermont was involved in that. And I am so impressed with this project. If you ever get down that way, check it out.
How many units?
I think about 25.
25.
Yeah. And so this was a huge project, and you may be sitting there saying, this is the example I'm supposed to take back to my little town. What I would like you to take back, what I'd encourage you to take back, is that there was a lot of creativity that went into this, and a lot of long-term thinking and real grassroots visioning. And so you come to this from the energy world, but step in a little bit farther and think of the partners you can bring together to achieve energy goals through things like housing and community redevelopment. I don't want to dwell on zoning as much as I know you all like zoning. Surely that is why you got into energy action. But there are limitations because a lot of our zoning models are 100 years old that make it really hard to create the kind of places for people that we want. When we have made changes to zoning, we've made it easier for places to accommodate vehicles, which serves people in a way and underserves people in another way. And so there are opportunities to, I'll just leave it and say that there are opportunities to update old zoning codes to reduce parking requirements, to deal with the way that buildings relate to the land and the streets. That's your tantalizing preview of zoning and energy. I will talk a little more about this in an example, and then I think I'm done. So, Brattleboro. We saw the preview. This is the building from the other side. I like Deb's picture a lot, too. How many of you have been to the Brattleboro Food Co-op? Cool, yeah, I used to live in Brattleboro, so many of you know that it used to be way at the back of the lot. There was this big old parking lot in the beginning, and you had a single-story building that looked like maybe it used to be an IGA. And it was your basic strip development. So the community knew they needed a new building, and they thought, how can we maximize this project? And the way they did it, as you heard from Deb, is by putting commercial grocery space on the first floor, office on the second, affordable housing on the third and fourth. They moved this building to the street, so it feels like more of a place when you're walking along instead of walk, parking pit. And they decided, they also made a commitment to stay downtown. North and south of Brattleboro, there's a lot of commercial space. They made a commitment to staying downtown. They're 800 feet away from a transit center, and this is an important part of the community, okay? So, I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna leave you 3 things that I think you can do. 1, please get involved in planning and zoning. Like I said, may not have been your entry point here, but community planning is a place, a very important place, right, Kevin?
Right.
Planners in the room, where you have conversations about what you want from the future and what the steps are that you're going to take to get there. And those can lead to policies about energy explicitly, but also policies very much related to energy, housing, transportation, land use. You've got to get in on that ground floor and get involved in that. And some people might say, well, I don't really want to mess with zoning because it's boring, and because it's not boring, actually. And because it takes so long for things to change. We don't have any development going on in our town. Why bother with the zoning? That's why you bother with the zoning. It's because every single development that does happen, you want to be a puzzle piece that adds up to the overall outcome and community that you want. So I'm not talking about micromanaging. I'm talking about making sure that what you get in your community is what you want over time. Team up with and support the housing development community. In about 30 seconds, you will find yourself very inspired to do just that when you hear from Eileen, because you can really show up and support the development of housing. Housing developers, whether for-profit or nonprofit, put a lot of work in, and if there's community support for good projects from a variety of sectors, including y'all, that's great. And then last but not least, get involved in transportation. May seem easier said than done, but look even for the tiniest thing that you can do in your community. Is it a park and ride? Is it offering your neighbor a ride? Is it getting one EV charging station somewhere? Is it having a day where you get a bunch of kids to walk to school together? Or even get dropped off, you know, a quarter mile before school and walk to school together? Just anything, visibility, to think about the different ways you can do transportation at different scales. I'll also put in a plug for state policy conversations. There are a lot of them, but 3 you can listen for and then talk to your legislators about. Climate Action Commission is doing a decarbonization study, which could lead to price mechanisms that incentivize decreased use of carbon-based fuels. Act 250, the next 50 years, maybe is about as exciting to some of you as zoning, but is very important to shape development as well. And then electric vehicle policy. Keep your ears out, get informed, call me. I can tell you what I think, and let your legislators know you care. Thank you.